As pro, I'm happy to affirm the resolution that preemptive warfare is morally justified. Let's start with the definition of preemptive warfare. Preemptive warfare is defined as the use of military force in the face of an imminent attack. Let's start with 2 points of res analysis. The first is preemption, not prevention. Now, preemptive warfare isn't just two words thrown together that we have to interpret. It's actually a specific military term, and it refers to an instance where it looks like an enemy is about to attack us, and so based on that information, we decide to strike first and protect ourselves. Now, this is different from something known as preventative warfare, which is kind of like shooting on suspicion. In other words, we're just walking around super paranoid and we look at a nation that doesn't hold our values and we just decide to slaughter them instantly. It's a very different thing. So preemptive warfare doesn't just mean any old shot in the dark, but it means to attack when it appears that we're about to be attacked. Let's move down to my second res analysis. This is on the table. So when we say that preemptive warfare is morally justified, we're saying that it's a moral option. This is different from saying potentially, anytime we have a technical opportunity to use preemptive warfare that we have to. For example, if I said self-defense is good and the opponent stood up and said, well, there are ways of using self-defense, like walking around with an AK-47, that would be pretty irrational. We don't conclude by saying, well, self-defense must not be good then. We just simply say, well, that's one method of self-defense that's not worth using. So the question here is preemptive warfare morally justified? Is that class of military strategy, is it moral or is it not moral? Let's sit down into my values of human life. And the chief reason to use this is that is the purpose of government. Governments aren't just contractually obligated to protect their citizens. They are morally bound to do so. And to watch as citizens die, to stand still as we are attacked from our enemies, I believe is a moral problem. I have one contention, and that's that preemption is protection. Now, let me just go ahead and say as pro that war is regrettable. In any situation, it's sad that we have to use war. And I'm not one to just, come out swinging and want to destroy thousands of innocent lives. That's not what you're voting for when you vote for pro. We'd like for it not to happen. However, there are circumstances where the decision for war has been taken out of our hands and that we have to do something. My ASA point is self-defense. A really good example of preemptive warfare. There's not that many available because it's a rare scenario. But look at Israel in the Six-Day War. Now, on June 5th, 1965, Egypt mobilized its military forces on the Israeli border. And in response, instead of just waiting to get mowed down, Israel actually took airstrikes to Egypt and was able to push them back. In other words, a way of saying, hey, I have my pepper spray, you're not going to come close to me. And that effectively shooed them away, hence why the Six-Day War was only 6 days long. The visa point is sets a precedent. If nations are willing and ready to show preemptive military action, other nations are less likely to attack them, meaning that by mutually assured destruction ideology, the world's going to be more peaceful because no one's willing to pick on the other person. And that's just a better place for us to live.
Okay, awesome. So let's go ahead and start with the analysis on the resolution, kind of the framework for the debate, just because that's important. I don't think we're going to have that much disagreement. I'm going to agree with the definition of preemptive warfare. I understand there's a difference in attacking somebody on the basis that you think that they are going to attack you, as opposed to attacking somebody just because they share different values or because you don't like them. So we're not talking about just all attacks in general. We're talking about warfare being preemptive in the sense that you think that somebody is going to attack you, and there's some sort of evidence to support that notion, and therefore you attack first to prohibit them or to stop them from attacking you. It's a defensive measure in the definition. Okay, cool. I want to look at the resolution through a lens of pragmatism. Specifically, pragmatism asks the question, or asks us to judge ideas and concepts based on how they work in the real world, and not just on philosophical, hypothetical, unicorn, fairy world notions. In other words, we need to be looking at real life applications and examples here. I think you've done that. I just want to make this observation. I'm also going to agree with you on the value of human life. I think it's a great measure for the resolution. The question becomes, does preemptive warfare support human life, or does it not support human life? Does it protect human life more than it harms human life? So that's effectively how we're deciding if it's morally justified. And the reason for this is protection of human life is something that's moral. It's morally preferable to not kill a bunch of humans than it is to actually kill them. Now, the first observation is one that I want to make, that you also kind of make, in that war should be avoided at all costs, if at all possible, because war inherently takes human life. Now, that's not to say that there's never any instances when war is bad, but generally speaking, the side that can avoid war, I think, is going to have an advantage in achieving the value, because if two countries can remain at peace with each other, that's always preferable over those countries attacking each other. With that understood, I have two arguments specifically that support this notion. The first one is that striking first guarantees the loss of life by engaging in a war. The moment you say, we're going to attack a country, it guarantees that you lose life. And the application I was going to run here is actually the application that you used, which was the 6 Days War. Now, here's what's interesting about the 6 Days War. The reason Egypt was going up and pushing against the border of Israel was because Russia had told them to. And Israel thought, oh no, they're up against our border. They're going to attack us. We better go bomb them. Well, they ended up killing over 20,000 Egyptian, a combination of citizens and military folks, and over 1,500 Israeli people also died. Here's the funny thing. They were never going to attack Israel. And Russia specifically told them not to attack Israel, which means the command that Russia sent Egypt to the front lines to attack them was, Russia specifically told them don't ever attack, which means under the world where it's justified, you attack and you lose all this life. Under my world, what I'm saying is you wait because it means that you don't guarantee a loss of life while going into war. The second argument, which I'll work on in my next speech, is going to be that striking first doesn't usually affect the outcome of the war and doesn't actually ever save any lives. I'll go ahead and pass the mic.
Question. What should Israel do if they hear they're about to be attacked this morning based on their best strategic evidence?
From a strategic perspective, absolutely, they should get ready. They should prepare so that at the moment Egypt does attack them, they're ready to wipe Egypt out. But what they should never do is they should never preemptively strike when they're not 100% certain that there's going to be an attack. And here's where the analysis comes in of why striking first is not a tactical advantage. And I'll extend that later. I can extend it now if you'd like. I can go ahead and make the argument. Is that okay? Sure. Then I'll go ahead and make the second argument because it kind of answers the question. My argument here is very simple. Striking first, in most cases, does not affect the outcome of the war. In other words, what I'm going to argue is that preemptive warfare has two impacts. It guarantees a war, and it doesn't give you a tactical advantage, which means it's always going to be preferable to wait until the other guys make the first move and wait on the chance that they don't actually attack you, which is what has happened in a number of instances in history, whether it's been the Cold War, whether it's been North Korea, whether it's been the 6 Day War. If you wait, you open up the potential opportunity for there not to be a war, which means you save more human life. If you attack, you guarantee the war happens, and you don't gain any tactical advantage that's notable or that actually helps you in any way, shape, or form. I hope that answers your question. I'll pass the mic back.
Let's start with this argument on pragmatism. Pragmatism is the biggest reason that you should vote affirmative because the only way to avoid the scenario of the 6 Day War is to be perfect mind readers that know that the entire conspiracy of Egypt against you was perpetrated by another country. See, pragmatism is the whole problem with Kant. It says, well, only when you have perfect information and absolute omniscience over military strategy of the entire world, then you should probably do something. But that just doesn't exist. A nation that's told, hey, people in your country are about to die due to the aggressive actions of another country who are literally mobilizing troops on your border must do something. The fact that one country made a mistake one time doesn't matter. Now, here's the thing. Israel is a controversial issue. Experts actually aren't fully concluded that it was all just a Russian conspiracy. The history is still much over that. So yeah, Israel was dead wrong from the beginning. So he agrees, yeah, pragmatism is the reason you should vote pro. Human life, of course. He also says, war should be avoided at all costs. Okay, my response is, what are nations supposed to do? If another nation is imminently poised to attack you, in other words, not just to like punch you and run, but to actually engage in warfare with you, should you stand there and be the first to act or be the last to act? It's like if someone's charging at you with a knife, are you going to just let them beat the living tar out of you, or are you going to do something about it? So Michael's complaint about war, of course it's regrettable, but it's non-unique. War is going to happen in either scenario, so we must do something to protect ourselves. Next, he says striking first guarantees life lost. My first response is welcome to war. All war has life lost. That's not really a unique issue. My second response is of the current knowledge. Now, here's what's critical. Pragmatism says you accept stuff for the way that it works. And what Michael is actually telling you, he's able to have some hindsight 2020 on like a handful of applications. But what he won't probably tell you is that nations who have really good strategic information that they are about to get slaughtered should stand still and do nothing. They should just wait, maybe just hand a few soldiers their guns, but just get ready as they cross the border and start murdering your civilians. I'm not going to say that no strategic information can never be inaccurate. That's not really the claim here. But the claim is that if you are protecting your citizens, you should always err on the side of protecting them, not of standing still. What are your citizens going to say? What are you going to say to your citizens? Well, we thought that it might be a whole, German hoax and that we just never knew. And so we wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt. Of course not. You have to be proactive in protecting citizens. This is the best information you have. He says, well, there's no better outcome. Yeah, actually, there's better outcomes too. The first is that you control the theater. By getting the first strike in early, you are setting the tone for war, meaning that you have the strategic advantage because you have the first hit. I mean, like, who wants to roll first in Monopoly? Everyone, right? Because you get closest to the board, you get the pieces that you want faster. Lastly is push them back. Israel was able to end the war quickly because of this strike. That's what historians agree. So we already see a positive outcome. By attacking early on, they were able to end the war quickly.
Okay, great. So on pragmatism, you offer the response and you basically say, well, Michael, we can't have perfect knowledge. And you agree we don't have perfect action. That's why, or I agree with you, we don't have perfect knowledge, we don't have perfect action, which is why I say we should never risk going to war when we're unsure if people are going to attack. You're saying, well, Michael, you're just assuming that we have perfect knowledge that people won't attack us. And my argument is no, the presumption should be that people are not going to attack you, because it's much better to avoid a war than to get into one. And I think both of us can agree with that. But here's the difference between our sides. Your side guarantees a war, mine does not. So what you have to weigh in the debate round is you have to weigh, okay, guaranteed war means guaranteed loss of life versus allowing your opponent to make the first move and maybe lose a slight tactical advantage. And we'll get into some more weighing on those two ideas and those two arguments, but it's important to understand that on the pro side, you guarantee life is lost, and you do so based on people predicting the future, which is exactly what you argue is a bad thing and something that we don't have. We don't have knowledge of the future perfectly. Okay, the second argument you have here, is basically like, oh, well, are you just going to let the country stand by and get mowed down? Like, is Israel just going to stand by and let Egypt come and kill all their citizens? No, of course not. The choice in the resolution is not preemptive warfare or take a vacation and sit back and drink pina coladas and do nothing. No, there are other things that you can do to stop wars from happening or stop attacks from happening and to get ready for attacks. The first thing is you can build up your defenses. If Egypt puts a bunch of military soldiers at the border and you're worried about the soldiers crossing the border and killing your people, there's a very simple solution. And the solution is to put all your soldiers also on the border to stop them if they come in. So you can build up defenses. You can seek out diplomatic solutions. But pretending like the only choice is full-on attack people who may not attack you or do nothing is ridiculous. My side of the resolution isn't inaction. My side of the resolution is don't do a specific action that guarantees war and guarantees loss of life. The last argument here specifically is on Israel. Now you say, oh, well, you basically argue that they were able to strike first, and you talk about the benefits, the tactical advantage. And here's where I want to break this down just a little bit. Give me a single example of where a country was able to win a war because they struck first. Now, here's the thing. Israel can do the same exact attack, can do the same exact bombing of Egypt if they wait until Egypt crosses the border. They can be just as effective with their military strategic power if they wait until after Egypt attacks them. What they do with that is they ensure the same outcome in the war, but they also allow for the potential opportunity for there not to be a war. Now here's the thing. In most military conflicts, countries are not perfectly equal in military strength, whether that's military technology, whether it's number of forces, whether it's geographical location. Most of the time, there's a military imbalance, which means the tactical advantage of striking first will not be the single reason that a country loses a war. So here's my challenge. Show me an example of a country that won pure.
So I'm going to pass the mic back and finish your question.
Yeah, sorry, my seconds ran out in 5 seconds. Okay, no, what I was saying, the challenge is show me an example of where the tactical advantage of striking first was the single reason that a country was able to win a war. Meaning right now, if the United States goes to war with Zimbabwe, it's not going to matter much if Zimbabwe attacks the United States first. There's going to be a clear winner in that war. And that's been the case for most wars throughout all of history. So even if I'll go ahead and concede to you, where countries have equal military power, sure, a preemptive strike might be justified because it will allow you to leverage that tactical advantage. However, that's not the case for most wars in history. That's not the case for most possible hypothetical wars. I'll pass the mic now.
Michael does ask, for example, where striking first gave the singular advantage. So the first thing is, I'm not claiming it's a singular advantage. I'm claiming that it is an advantage and it is superior to standing still as you are shot. How about we just come back to December 25th through 26th, 1776, where George Washington decides to preemptively attack the British on Christmas Eve before they are suspecting. Now, again, I'm not a fan of war here, but most historians, I don't really know many that disagree on this theory of the Revolutionary War, that it gave the colonists a massive strategic advantage because they get the first hit. Come back to the Monopoly example. If you have a choice between hitting second or hitting first or rolling second or rolling first, you're always going to go for first because you get the advantage. Now listen to Michael's solution. Let's step down to his argument on pragmatism. He says, well, we should be building defenses. My first response is enormous risk. You are literally saying that, no. Yeah, we know the troops are on our border. The beaches of Normandy are full of Nazi soldiers. But, let's just wait for them to make the first move. Michael's ideals sound great on the assumption that the enemy isn't going to do anything. Like, we, of course, avoid war in Michael's perfect scenario, where every nation is constantly putting its military on the border and then is never using it. Is like never even tempted to shoot a civilian. But in the scenario that they are, in the scenario that not every single nation in the world is just out to trick us, and in the scenario where our strategic information is probably somewhat credible, it's reasonable to attack first because you are acting in self-defense. So Michael says build defense. I say don't wait to die. Build your defense early on by airstriking. The second response here is civilian casualties not necessary. There are tons of ways to use military force that's aggressive, like airstrikes, crippling nuclear facilities, crippling weapons supplies that are aggressive, that aren't necessarily completely violent. Again, voting pro doesn't mean that we just assassinate every foreign leader and murder every citizen in the country. That's not the goal. The goal here is to ask the question that if we are about to be attacked, do we stand still and just hope that nothing happens and just tell our citizens, yeah, we're just going to cross our fingers on this one, or do we actually do something to protect ourselves? I want you to remember that every single person who's in a scenario personally who gets charged by an offender is going to do something to defend themselves. Maybe if running's an option, they'll go for it, but nations can't run anywhere. When Israel's about to get slaughtered by its enemies, it has no other option. He also says, well, we shouldn't just guess. My response is preemption isn't a guess. This is a mischaracterization of what preemptive warfare is. We're assuming that there's some sort of imminent attack. In other words, there's some credible evidence to suggest that. In the world where you don't have perfect knowledge about something, you have to go on your best information. And to stand still and be killed is a mistake.
Joe, the choice in this debate is not to stand still or be killed or to attack people who you think is going to attack you. Don't let Joe make the argument that says my side is all about just letting you be run over by the opponent, the enemy. That's not what I'm advocating for. You can make a defense and wait till somebody makes a first move and then do all the same strategies that you would do if you were going to preemptively strike. Look at the Egypt-Israel example. All Israel has to do is wait until Egypt steps across the border. The moment their military soldiers cross the border, they bomb the crap out of them, and guess what? You have the same exact result. However, what we know from history, and sure, there may be some people that disagree, is that Egypt was likely not going to attack, which means on my side of the resolution, the best case scenario is that you don't have a war and 24,000 people don't die. Under your side of the resolution, the best case scenario is 24,000 people die. So I access the same benefits that you do of striking preemptively without having the guaranteed cost of losing life in every single war. One note on the Revolutionary War. First of all, the reason the revolutionaries won in the Revolutionary War was not simply because they attacked first. You cited one particular battle in which on Christmas Day, Washington was able to sneak up on troops successfully. And in battles, sure, that's great. Having the element of surprise is absolutely awesome. And we agree with that. But we're not talking about that because the British also had elements of surprise in certain battles. Some of them they won, some of them they lost. The reason that pretending like the reason the revolutionaries won was exclusively because they attacked first is a bit ludicrous because there were often times when the British also attacked first. There were a lot of other underlying factors in the war I don't want to go into. But all that said is this. The strategic advantage of striking first will not, in most circumstances, impact the outcome of the war. There's three types of scenarios in which wars happen. One military power hitting another equally strong military power. This almost never happens. Most countries are not perfectly militarily balanced. In that instance, you may have a case that striking first gives yourself a tactical advantage. But the two other instances are far more common. It's where a weaker country attacks a stronger country. If Zimbabwe decides to attack Russia, they're screwed. They're toast. It's not going to matter if they can hit them first because Russia is going to absolutely dominate them. So it's in their best interest to try to avoid war if at all possible and not strike preemptively. On the second hand, if a stronger nation is fighting a weaker nation, it's still in the best interest of waiting first. Because as a stronger nation, you don't want to just go killing people willy-nilly, but you also don't want to risk the potential for some of your citizens to die. Meaning you can still guarantee the victory by waiting and taking the same tactical measures that you would, but it's never profitable for when there's an imbalance of military power to actually strike first. And you haven't demonstrated in the debate, Joe, that the tactical advantage of striking first significantly affects people's abilities to win.
Michael's picking on examples where the odds were stacked against us, like from the very beginning, and saying that it's, it's maybe not the best strategic option. Michael's not coming up and saying that preemption is actually bad or immoral. He's just saying, well, there are some scenarios where it doesn't matter what you do, but that doesn't tell us whether or not preemptive warfare is morally justified. So first he says, wait till they cross the line. My response is, why let border civilians die? I mean, Michael's solution is to say, oh, of course, we can do all the same stuff as you said before, but let's just let ourselves get killed a little bit first. So if we want to talk about not changing the outcome, yeah, there's a different outcome, and that fewer people will die if you wait to have 2 hits instead of 1. At least there is a chance after that first strike that the enemy calms down, that they realize, hey, maybe we shouldn't be attacking this country. They seem really serious about it. So absolutely, preemptive warfare can change the outcome. Now, as I've said before, of course, the application pool is limited, and I'm not just going to pull up any war and pretend it was preemptive warfare. So Michael's continually begging me to come up with examples doesn't really help, because we have a really limited application pool. But that being said, I will mention some more. The Peloponnesian War in 431 to 404 BC is another good example of the Peloponnesians, who were led by Sparta, preemptively striking Athens because they were mobilizing and getting ready to attack them. The Sparta ended up taking the advantage in that war because they attacked first, because they got that strategic advantage. Michael isn't creating logical arguments as to why attacking first weakens you, as to why attacking first is wrong. He's just saying there are some scenarios where it doesn't matter what you do. That doesn't tell us that it's not morally justified. He says that this won't change the outcome. Well, first, we've already proven that it can. It has throughout history. Number one, yes, the Six-Day War, many people argue that it ended early because of Israel's preemptive war, because they showed early on, hey, you're not going to mess with us. Also cross-apply this to current foreign policy issues with Israel. Israel isn't, obviously there's a lot of conflict in the Middle East, but Israel isn't getting bombed left and right because they spend a crazy amount of money on their military policy. And if you look over to my B sub point, they set the precedent. They tell other nations that if you're going to mess with us, we're not going to let you do that, which is one of the reasons that very few nations directly declare war and just instantly march their troops into Israel's territory. So Michael keeps saying he's not, you're not going to change the outcome of the war. I'm not going to say there are scenarios where preemptive warfare will always be the solution. But if you have 2 equal countries, one of them is being an aggressor to you, it is far better that instead of just watching as a few of your citizens die like they don't even matter, that you actually get up and defend yourself, because you may scare the other nation off, like, for example, the Peloponnesians did in Sparta, or Israel did with Egypt, or you may end up, winning the war very quickly and not having to worry about it much further. Here's the critical point. Michael's not coming up with examples of why preemptive warfare is bad and why you should deny the best strategic information available. He's just saying, you might be wrong, so roll the dice, let a few citizens die, and then maybe later we can attack. I'd say that we should put self-defense first, because we should put human life of our citizens first.
Because I don't support rolling the dice that I negate the resolution. Every time you attack a country and you do not know for certain that they're going to attack you, you're rolling the dice. And the dice that you're playing with are the lives of the soldiers that you're sending and the lives of the people that you're killing. So, don't pretend that like I'm the only side here that's rolling the dice, in playing with people's lives at the roll of a dice. I think the more conservative option, the more smart play, is the one that says we don't attack other countries and get involved in wars if we don't have to. Now, remember, the resolution today is not saying, and this was what we both agreed in the framework, that in preemptive warfare, you always know for 100% certain if somebody's going to attack you. We have countless examples of wars that were supposedly imminent that never came to fruition. One I'll name off the top of my head is the Cold War. Russia was supposedly an imminent threat. Tons of historians, tons of scholars all agree that Russia and the United States was so close to being to war that it would absolutely have been justified in trying to take out nuclear facilities or taking out the other country first and a preemptive strike. Russian leaders literally signed off on nuclear strikes on multiple occasions, and it was only held back by a few individuals. So there's no doubt that in the Cold War, there was an imminent threat of nuclear disaster. Under the resolution, what Joe's suggesting is that the United States should nuke Russia and inevitably not only kill millions of Russian citizens, but also kill millions of United States citizens when they nuke us back. Now, on the argument that you make, that my arguments are not impacting back to the resolution, I'm just saying that it's a bad strategy, which is not the same as which is not the same thing as morally justified. Remember, the resolution is based on the value of human life, which we both agreed to, meaning we're measuring whether or not preemptive warfare is morally justified on the issue of if human life is taken or lost. What I'm saying is that preemptive warfare always takes life, and yet it doesn't give you any strategic advantage. What your argument for is, Joe, your argument is saying preemptive warfare is good because it saves lives by attacking first. And I'm negating that argument by saying, no, it doesn't actually save lives. All it does is negate lives. So my arguments absolutely do impact back to the resolution. The strategy of preemption is what your entire case is based on. If preemption doesn't do anything to help you win the war and doesn't help you save lives, then why are you doing it? The last, where'd it go? Actually, go ahead and pass the mic back.
Ask if let's say that tomorrow morning North Korea shows up on our border and wants to attack us. How is waiting for them to nuke us first going to save any lives?
You have to ask the question, what is, if they show up on our border and say they're going to attack us mean? Like, if they show up on our border and don't do anything, I have no I don't support us attacking North Korea if they're not going to do anything. They've been saying they're going to attack us for the last 7 years, and they still haven't done it. So, you know, under your side, you guarantee that we get involved in a war with North Korea. I'm 100% okay with waiting until they do something before the United States wipes them off the face of planet Earth.
What do you need to do for us to attack them, Michael?
Make some sort of a that would actually engage in an active war.
Well, they've already done plenty of aggressive military actions. They just had a nuclear test the other week. What do they actually have to do for us to attack them?
Launching a nuclear weapon into the air is not an attack on the United States. So they would have to actually attack the United States.
They would have to take U.S. citizens' lives.
That's not the same thing as attacking the United States. I mean, sure. I mean, if they attack and their attack is successful, then yes, it would take American citizens' lives.
Okay. So Michael's conceding the essential issue. He is waiting for another country to take the lives of he's waiting for country B to take country A's citizens' lives and then attack. The only difference between voting con is that in the pro world, we don't have to watch our citizens die first. We could potentially walk out of a war as the early victor because we pushed back someone quickly. So first, on his arguments about doubts and uncertainty, my response is attacking prevention. Again, we define this very clearly. Either Michael is saying that all imminent threats are total malarkey and that no nation has any semblance of good military strategy, and they don't know like a handwritten note from a sign saying we're about to attack you. Like basically militaries are terrible at reading threats. That's the only argument he's making. Otherwise he's not actually attacking preemption, which assumes war. It's assuming that there is this imminent threat, that something's about to happen, that something's going to take place, and he's saying, yeah, but what about the circumstances where it's pretty obvious something's going to take place? We shouldn't do that then. I agree. I'm defending the scenario where there is an imminent threat upon the United States. North Korea launches a nuclear weapon towards us. North Korea shows up on our border. In the example we mentioned earlier, where a nation mobilizes its troops on the border. And in that scenario, Michael has made the essential concession he would wait for our citizens to die. If that's true, then there's only one difference between us, and that's that we are more likely to win because we take the strategic advantage. Also, he talks about the Cold War. My response is a completely different situation. The Cold War was a very different situation because, one, every other nation would be implicated by an attack. The other thing is that it wasn't the rational choice for us to make. It's not that it would have been wrong had Russia started to attack us. It's that they didn't reach the point where we thought they were going to attack us. We thought that they were ready, but the attack wasn't imminent and in our face. Lastly, he says, you start the war. My response is, there's going to be a war. When there's an imminent attack and a nation is preparing in the process of getting ready to slaughter your citizens, Michael's running disadvantages on war, but the truth is there's going to be one. Who's going to attack first? Is it going to be you or is it going to be the other country?
Question. You said that North Korea testing a nuke was an act of military aggression. So my question to you, would it be morally justified for the United States to right now attack North Korea?
It's not an imminent attack on us, so no.
Okay, great. Then we agree. Remember, the resolution, imminent threat, is not saying that only when we 100% have certainty that somebody's going to attack us, that preemptive warfare is morally justified. That's not my position. That's not the position we agreed on to. If North Korea launches a nuke at the United States, attacking them is not preemptive. That is reactive. That's 100%. That's what my side of the resolution is. North Korea testing a nuclear weapon or moving troops is not an act of war, and I don't support attacking them and taking innocent life and getting us guaranteed in a war. In that scenario, remember, imminent threat says that the countries have to look at the evidence and say, do we think somebody's going to attack us? If so, let's shoot first and ask questions later. I'm saying that the tactical advantage of striking first does not justify guaranteeing you get into a war and taking human life. This is very, very simple.
Okay, so the essential issue is preemptive warfare has worked in the Peloponnesian War, it's worked in the Six-Day War, as we mentioned, and it's also worked with George Washington. When you have evidence that someone is on the verge of killing you, you must do something about it and not stand still and be killed, as Michael would ask you to. That's the essential reason to vote for pro.
You don't have to stand still and do nothing.
I mean, that's a nice claim. But the resolution assumes imminence. The resolution doesn't just assume that we have been attacked, but that in a country is in the process of attacking. Launching a nuke would be in the process of attacking us. It would be imminence, and we should attack. So when a nation is imminent, because the resolution assumes that, we should do something. Michael's